Welcome tonight. Allow yourself to sink softly into the past. Settle into your blankets. Let your shoulders loosen, your jaw unclench, and imagine, just for a little while, what it might have been like to live another life long ago. The year is 1849. The world is swelling with whispers of gold, soft murmurs that grow into shouts carried on the winds of hope and hunger. Thousands, no, tens of thousands of people pack up their lives, some carrying little more than a satchel and a dream, and they head west, to California, to fortune, perhaps, to failure, more often. This is not a story of riches, not really. Tonight's journey takes us not to the glittering dream, but into the worn, ragged heart of it. You won't find golden nuggets here, not the kind that glimmer. You'll find calloused hands, tents that sag with rain, and cooking fires that smoke rather than burn. We begin in the dirt. We walk beside the hopeful and the hopeless. We listen for the rhythm of pickaxes, the muttered cursing at broken shovels, the simmering pot of beans that rarely taste as they should. This is life in a gold rush camp, hard, uncertain, strangely ordinary. We'll follow 4 pathways tonight. First, into a day lived in the mud of a 4-9 ER camp, filled with the dull repetition of labor, loss, and longing. Then into the story of a man who had everything until gold was found on his land. Next, we'll listen to the winds of old mines and the whispers of forgotten treasures. And finally, we'll peer into the shops, courts, and counting houses where the real fortunes were made, far from the muddy diggings. So if your eyes grow heavy, let them close. There is no need to stay awake for the whole tale. It will wait for you, as history always does. Now, take a breath, let it out slowly, and imagine yourself in the cold, early morning haze of a California gold camp. Asterisk, asterisk, imagine yourself waking to the slow drip of moisture seeping through canvas. The roof of your tent, thin and sagging from the night's fog, shudders slightly as someone walks by outside. It is early, though not by any clock you own. Most men here do not wear watches. Time is counted in daylight, and in backaches. The air is damp and smells of earth, smoke, and last night's fire gone cold. Your boots, still wet from yesterday, go on with reluctance, stiff and resistant. You step outside into the slow, rising mist of a chilly morning. All around you, the camp stirs in silence, or with grumbles too tired to be loud. A cough here, the clang of a tin cup against a rock, the soft scrape of someone sharpening a blade. This is a gold rush camp, not a town, not a city, not yet. The ground beneath you is mostly mud, peppered with boards and stones placed in an attempt to stay dry. They rarely work. Chickens roam freely, though they're not anyone's pets. A man with a red scarf feeds a mule from his own palm. Another kneels, still half asleep, poking at his cooking pot. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is usually beans. Sometimes boiled hardtack, unforgiving biscuit that cracks more teeth than it feeds. Occasionally, someone barters for eggs or dried fruit. But those are luxuries. You eat with your hands, or from the same tin you cook in. There are no tables here, no real kitchens, just fire rings and whatever logs you can drag near enough to sit on. Conversations are often short and spoken in low tones. Most are too tired to talk. The daily rhythm is always the same. Eat, dig, sift, hope, and start over. Your tools are simpler: shovel, a pan, maybe a rocker if you've invested in one. You dig along the river, or up the bank, or in a hole someone else abandoned. And you sift slowly, carefully through water and grit, watching for anything that glimmers. Most days there is nothing, but still, you keep digging. There is a strange camaraderie among strangers. Sometimes men sing, off-key, always, or they swap rumors about a new strike just up the ridge, usually false. Still, it breaks the monotony. There are no women here, or very few. When one does appear walking down the trail with a bonnet and 2 large baskets, everyone notices, but no one speaks, not out loud. There is an uneasy silence that follows her until she disappears behind a tent. Many men write letters they'll never send. Some carve notches in wood to count the days. Others mark a stone or scratch initials into bark. There is always something missing in these camps, something silent, like the absence of laughter. Even when men joke, it is dry, brittle. The kind of humor that doesn't leave the mouth. Hygiene is minimal. You might wash in the creek if it's warm and you can spare the energy. But soap is rare, and privacy even rarer. Many wear the same shirt for days, sometimes weeks. The smell of sweat is ever present, but strangely unnoticed. And then there are the illnesses: scurvy, dysentery, fevers that rise fast and leave you shaking when someone dies. A shallow grave is dug, and a makeshift marker boot, a bit of cloth, sometimes just a stone, is placed at the head. There is rarely a prayer. Few remember names for long. The weather turns often. One moment, dry dust dances around your ankles. The next, clouds roll in like tired giants, dropping heavy rain that soaks everything. Tents collapse, tools rust. The firewood becomes useless, and still the digging continues. Some men grow quiet and strange. They speak to themselves or to the gold they haven't found. Others become loud, reckless. They gamble away what little they have, hoping for luck to change course. Now and then, someone strikes it rich. A small pouch filled with flakes. Word spreads quickly, and others swarm the site, digging wildly. The man, if he's lucky, disappears in the night. If he's unlucky, he's robbed before sunrise. But most days end like they begin, with beans, perhaps a bit of salted pork if you're fortunate. You sit by the fire, staring into the red coals, letting the heat numb your feet in the distance. Someone plays a harmonica, slow, mournful notes that seem to settle into the air like mist. No one claps. No one asks for more. It just plays until it stops. Sleep comes easily, but it is not restful. You wake often, shifting, swatting at insects, listening for sounds that don't belong. Theft is common. So are fights and animals. Coyotes sometimes, dogs gone feral, the occasional snake, and then morning again, another pot of beans, another day of digging, another quiet meal beneath gray skies. You begin to forget what month it is. You forget what you once wanted, and slowly, the gold always just beyond reach becomes not a dream, but a duty. You dig because it's what you do now, because to stop would mean something worse, admitting it was never really there, not for you, not in this camp. And as the camp dims once more beneath a sky filled with distant stars, you lie on your back, staring up through the hole in your tent, and you wonder how long until you leave? How long before you forget to wonder? Asterisk, asterisk, as the morning haze drifts away from the muddy camp trails, let us gently shift our focus to the man whose dreams set the gold rush in motion, though not in the way he had ever intended. John Sutter, a name once whispered with admiration, later murmured with irony. His story, like the hills of California themselves, is layered, uneven, and riddled with unexpected twists. Imagine yourself walking through the tall grass of the Sacramento Valley in the 1840s. The scent of dry earth mingles with the faint sweetness of wildflowers. The land is vast quiet, except for the soft crunch beneath your boots and the distant murmur of the river. There is no bustling camp here yet, no pickaxes, no shouting, no gold pans clinking in shallow water. Instead, there is one man's vision, a dream of an agricultural empire, rich not with gold, but with wheat fields, cattle herds, vineyards, and self-sufficiency. Asterisk, asterisk, John Sutter was a Swiss immigrant, arriving in California, then still part of Mexico, in 1839. He carried with him not just supplies, but grand ideas. Ideas of founding a colony that could one day rival the elegance and prosperity of the old world. With a carefully practiced charm and a strategic eye, he secured a land grant of nearly 50,000 acres in the Sacramento Valley. He called it New Helvetia, New Switzerland, and in many ways, it was a reflection of his dreams. Fertile land. Native American laborers, often coerced or indentured. Adobe walls, cattle ranges, and even a distillery. You can picture the rhythmic sounds of his growing settlement. Horses' hooves on packed earth, the clatter of tools, and the soft hum of wind through tall poplar trees. Sutter wore tailored suits and conducted his affairs from a shaded porch with the air of a man building legacy. But behind this calm exterior lay something more precarious: an empire built on borrowed money, fragile treaties, and a labor force that was as restless as the frontier itself. Still, for a time, it worked. Asterisk, asterisk, it was in January of 1848 that Sutter's life changed forever. Not with fanfare, but with a quiet observation. James W. Marshall, a carpenter employed by Sutter to construct a sawmill on the American River, noticed something shimmering in the water. A fleck of metal, stubbornly bright against the riverbed stones. At first, they weren't sure. Could it be ... They tested it with lye and fire. It didn't blacken. It didn't vanish. It was gold. Sutter, upon hearing the news, did not rejoice. Instead, he fretted. Gold was not part of his plan. He feared what a rush of outsiders might do to his fragile holdings, to the crops, to the delicate balance of his land grants. He asked Marshall and others to keep it quiet. But gold doesn't keep secrets. By March, whispers spread. By summer, thousands were streaming into the region. And by year's end, Sutter's dreams lay in the shadows of tents and shanties built on his own land. Asterisk, asterisk. It's easy to assume that John Sutter would have profited from the discovery. After all, it happened on his territory. Yet, in a cruel twist of fate, the rush that made California famous utterly destroyed him. Miners overran his fields. They stole cattle. They stripped trees. They built fires with his lumber and carved paths through his crops. The mill, never quite finished, was left to rot. Contracts he had relied on were ignored. He tried to defend his land in court, But in the chaos of shifting governments from Mexican rule to American, the legal foundations of his holdings dissolved like sand in the river. His son, John Sutter Jr., tried to salvage something by founding Sacramento on part of the land, but the city quickly grew beyond their control. The streets buzzed with gamblers, merchants, and fortune seekers, not farmers and tradesmen. Sutter's polite requests to protect his property were no match for the fevered energy of gold hunger. By the early 1850s, Sutter was broke. The adobe walls of New Helvetia crumbled, the cattle vanished, and the man once known as the Emperor of the Sacramento Valley became a guest in rented rooms, lobbying in Washington, D.C. for restitution that would never fully come. A quiet decliner. Imagine him in his later years, seated by a fire in a cold eastern boarding house. Snow taps softly against the windows. He watches the flames dance in the hearth, not unlike the light that once danced in the waters of the American River. Gold, always gold. It had promised the world and taken everything. He spoke often of justice, of what was owed to him, but justice came slowly, if at all. In 1865, Congress granted him a modest pension, but only after repeated appeals. He never stopped writing letters, never stopped hoping for recognition. He died in 1880, alone in a Pennsylvania hotel, far from California, far from the empire he had tried to build. He had asked for a final hearing before Congress. It was scheduled for the next day. Asterisk, asterisk, and yet, John Sutter is remembered not for the utopia he dreamed of, but for what happened despite him. The mill, the gold, the flood of people. His name endures on plaques and towns, though few recall the arc of his ambitions. There is something haunting in his legacy. A man who sought peace and prosperity, undone by the very force he helped unleash. As you drift further into this soft corner of history, consider how often the great changes in the world begin not with applause, but with something smaller. Glint in the water, a stranger's whispered words, the crack of a tool against stone. And now, as the noise of the gold fields fades into the hush of forgotten maps and faded dreams, let us gently turn our gaze to the hidden corners of the Sierra Nevada and beyond, where the legends of lost mines and treasure still stir the quiet earth. Asterisk, asterisk, the fire has burned low now in the imagined camp. The pickaxes lie still. The coffee in the battered tin mug has long since cooled, and as night falls across the hills of California, the mind of the miner turns slowly, softly from sweat and toil to stories. For where there is gold, there are always tales, legends, really. Whispers of fortunes missed by mere moments, of maps lost to flood or fire, of men who found too much to fast and were never seen again. These stories, often shared around lanterns or murmured into the darkness just before sleep, were the gentle hauntings of gold rush camps. And while many were fiction, embroidered over time, some were close enough to the truth to stir the heart. So imagine yourself now, not in the bustle of a busy camp, but on a quiet trail just past sunset. The trees press in on either side, their needles soft beneath your boots. The wind carries a scent of dust and pine, and ahead there's a crumbling wooden sign, half buried in brush. It reads, "Nothing now." The name, the warning, both long faded. You have found yourself near the site of a forgotten mine. Asterisk, asterisk, perhaps the most whispered about mystery of California's gold rush was the lost cement mine. The tale begins, as so many do, with a pair of prospectors men, out of luck and nearly out of hope. They were high in the eastern Sierra Nevada, near the area that would one day become Mammoth Lakes. Food was low, spirits were lower. Then one of them noticed something odd in the reddish rock. What looked like chunks of cement, but heavy. Too heavy. Inside, glittering bright, were veins of pure gold. Not flakes, not specks, but solid, stunning streaks. They broke off a piece to take with them, intending to return when better supplied, but they never found the spot again. Their path had wandered. The terrain was deceptive, and by the time they returned, armed with shovels, tents, and fresh provisions, the mountain had hidden her secret once more. Over the decades, many tried to find it. Some claimed they had, others vanished trying. The rocks in that region, rich with iron and shadowed by snow, all seemed to echo with possibility. And so, the lost cement mine remains unconfirmed, unreachable, and perfect fuel for fireside dreams. ****. Further south, tales of gold took on a darker tone. One of the most famous, though likely more Arizona than California, was the story of the lost Dutchman's mine. But its shadow spilled over into Western prospecting lore all the same. The Dutchman, whose name was likely Jacob Waltz, was said to have discovered a cache of gold so rich that he could barely carry what he mined in a single day. But he kept its location secret, sharing only a few cryptic clues before his death in 1891. Since then, more than 100 expeditions have searched the Superstition Mountains to find it. Many reported strange sightings, ghost lights, strange figures, sudden rock slides. Others spoke of curses and disappearances, though it's a tale rooted in a different state. The mood of the story crept through California camps like smoke. The idea that a man might stumble upon infinite wealth and be swallowed by it. Some legends stretched back even further, reaching beyond the gold fields into the ancient worlds of empire and conquest. There were murmurs, always quiet, that the Sierra foothills might hide a treasure far older than the gold rush. The story goes that after Hernan Cortes' conquest of the Aztec Empire in the early 1500s, a group of loyal Aztec warriors fled north with a portion of Montezuma's gold, determined to protect it from the Spanish. They moved through what would one day become Mexico, then California, hiding the treasure in a deep cave far from prying eyes. Of course, there is no proof of this, no maps, no carvings, but there were hints. A strange glyph here, an old Spanish coin there, enough to keep dreamers awake. Prospectors in the mid-1800s occasionally told of caves filled with stacked stones, or paths where compasses spun strangely. These were usually dismissed, but not always, and in a camp where the days were hard and the nights long, such stories gave hope, a buried treasure, a forgotten fortune, the idea that perhaps the mountain itself owed you something. It wasn't only the hills that held secrets. As towns boomed and busted often, in just a matter of years, they left behind strange echoes. In Bodie, a famously lawless mining town near the Nevada border, it's said that a large shipment of gold was hidden in the cellar of the town's now collapsed general store. Just before the town was abandoned in the early 20th century. Bodie today is a preserved ghost town, its buildings left in a state of arrested decay. Tourists wander through silent streets, past rusted wagons and glassless windows. But there are places even rangers won't go after dark. Some say the gold was never found. Others believe it was cursed. What's certain is that the town holds a heavy stillnesses, though it remembers too much. Asterisk, asterisk, these tales, though varied, share a rhythm, a glint, a chase, a loss, and always, always a sense that something lies just out of reach. They served a purpose in the camps. They softened the failures, gave reason to the randomness of fortune. If you hadn't struck it rich, maybe it was because your treasure was waiting somewhere hidden, meant only for you. And they reminded the miner, the traveler, the dreamer, that gold itself was a trickster. It gleamed just enough to keep you looking. It promised what it rarely delivered. Asterisk, asterisk, as you rest now in the quiet of this story. Imagine the earth beneath you not as dirt and stone, but as a book filled with forgotten lines, carvings washed away by time, footsteps that led nowhere. You might be lying on a slope above a long collapsed shaft, its timbers buried and rotting, or beside a tree where someone once etched a direction, a warning, or a mark no one else could. Understand, these hills were not empty before the miners came, and long after they left, the land kept its secrets. The wind still moves through the canyons. The water still rushes over riverbed stone. The rocks keep their silence, and in that hush it becomes easier to believe, not in the gold itself, but in the yearning, the searching, the sense that something vast and hidden might still be just beyond the bend. Asterisk, asterisk, as the decades passed, legends slowly gave way to machines. Steam-powered dredges, geological surveys, satellite imaging. But something was lost with that precision, the charm, perhaps, of not knowing. In an age where almost everything can be mapped or measured, the idea of a hidden mine still calls softly to us, like a lullaby hummed from under the mountain. So rest easy now. Let the stories settle around you like soft dust. They were never meant to be solved, only told and told again, and one day perhaps dreamed of. And as we gently move from legend back to reality, we turn now to the final chapter in our journey, where the true riches of the gold rush may not have lain in the ground, but in the pockets of those who never touched a pickaxe. The miner was the image, gritty, tired, dream-filled, but the money, the real money, that flowed elsewhere. By the mid-1850s, it had become clear. The gold rush wasn't just about gold. It was about what gold did to a place, how it pulled people in like a tide, how it made entire towns appear overnight, and how those who sold to the dreamers, rather than chasing the dream themselves, often walked away with far heavier pockets. Let's step now into those towns, not with a pickaxe, but a ledger. Not into the mines, but into the stores, banks, and saloons, where the smart and sometimes ruthless made their fortunes off the backs of those who labored in the dirt. Asterisk, asterisk. There's an old saying in California history circles: during a gold rush, it's a good time to be in the shovel business. And no one understood this better than a man named Samuel Brannan. Brannan is a name worth remembering. He wasn't the first to find gold, but he might have been the first to get truly rich from it. When gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill, Brannan owned a store in San Francisco. Rather than rushing to the hills, he rushed to buy up every pick, pan, and shovel he could find. Then he ran through the streets of San Francisco shouting, "Gold, gold from the American River." It worked. The news spread like fire. Men dropped everything. Ships were abandoned in the harbor, and they all needed tools. Brannan sold them for outrageous prices. He became California's first millionaire, not by mining gold, but by understanding what miners needed most. His model was copied widely. Every new boomtown had a general store, often run by a savvy merchant who knew that desperation makes for loyal customers. Flour that cost 4 cents a pound back east might go for $1 or more in a mining camp. A single egg could cost the equivalent of $20 today. Boots, blankets, coffee, beans markups ranged from 500% to 1,000%. And the miners paid. They had no choice. Asterisk, asterisk. After long days of digging and failing, the miner turned to drink. And here, too, someone was waiting. Saloons sprang up faster than churches. In towns like Sonora or Angels Camp, there might be one saloon. For every 40 residents, whiskey was served raw. Cards were played fast. Fights were common. So was theft. But for the saloon keeper, it was a golden age. A drink that cost 5 cents to make could sell for 50. And many saloons didn't just offer liquor, they hosted gambling, ladies of company, and sometimes a private back room for bankers, or deals made in whispers. Saloons became information hubs. They were also where miners let their guard down and, sometimes, their gold was gone by morning. Asterisk, asterisk. As the gold flowed in, someone had to weigh it, store it, and convert it into usable money. That someone was usually a banker or, at least, a man who called himself one. In the earliest days, banks were little more than secure tents with a scale, a strongbox, and a man behind the table who looked confident. He'd weigh your gold dust, deduct a percentage for impurities, and issue you a promissory note or coinage. Many were honest, many were not. Scales were often rigged. The so-called banker might disappear overnight. But for those who stayed and built trusts like Henry Wells and William Fargo, who founded what would become Wells Fargo, the opportunity was enormous. Eventually, real institutions grew, and as more gold passed through them, banks began issuing loans, financing businesses, and buying up land from miners to pay their claims. The wealth was consolidating. Asterisk, asterisk. In theory, lawmen were there to keep peace. In practice, they were often businessmen with a badge. Sheriffs were frequently elected by popular vote in frontier towns, and the most popular were those who knew how to turn a blind eye for the right price. They also profited from fines, claim disputes, and jail fees. A miner could be arrested for fighting, fined heavily, and his equipment confiscated, without much of a trial. That equipment might later show up in a local auction, conveniently purchased by the sheriff's cousin. Meanwhile, savvy landowners began to buy up property near water or in newly developed towns, then charge high fees for mining access, water rights, or simply space to pitch a tent and the courts. They favored those with money. Asterisk, asterisk. Some of the most enduring names of American commerce began their rise, not by mining gold, but by mining the needs of miners. Levi Strauss, for instance, didn't go digging. He sold durable trousers, eventually. Made of denimond became a clothing legend. His product didn't glitter, but it endured. And that in the dust of California was just as valuable. Others built empires in shipping, transportation, and supply chains. A man might stake his fortune not on a single lucky pan of gold, but on shipping those pans in bulk from San Francisco to the hills. Stagecoach companies, telegraph services, mail routes, each one needed men, horses, money, and each made more than most miners ever dreamed. By the 1860s, many gold towns had shrunk or vanished, but the infrastructure remained. The men who had run the stores and banks, if they had stayed, were now running counties. They owned ranches, railroads, newspapers. Mining may have sparked California's growth, but commerce, finance, and law turned it into a state. And while the story of the lone prospector remains the most romantic, the story of the businessman is the one that actually built the roads. So now, as we leave behind the dust of the camps and the firelit stories of miners, we see the bigger picture. The gold rush wasn't just about gold, it was about people, about ambition, yes, but also about systems. Who owned the tools, who held the scales, who wrote the rules. And as the 20th century dawned, the mines slowed, but the businesses kept growing. The real gold was never in the riverbed, it was in the receipts. And somewhere, on a quiet street, in a California town that no longer echoes with pickaxes or whiskey-soaked songs, there's still a small building. Maybe a former bank, maybe a shop, maybe nothing at all. But once, someone stood there not with a dream of finding gold, but with a dream of selling it. And that, perhaps, is the truest tale of all.